Well, we have been told to go to bed since we were kids. It turns out it's not just so parents can watch their shows. No, sleep is actually very important to our health, and not getting enough sleep can cause irreparable harm. So today on Blue Sky, we are joined by a sleep expert who will tell us what's at stake when people are fatigued. We'll hear from people who work shift work or jobs that require them to keep unnatural hours. We'll hear from people whose health conditions make getting a good night's sleep nearly impossible. And as always, we want to hear from you. What's been your experience with sleep? Have you made changes in your life to be able to get a better sleep? If so, how has your sleep or the lack of sleep affected you? You can call 1-800-716-2221. You can also email bluesky@cbc.ca. Mike Harnett spends her days thinking about sleep. She is president of Solaris Fatigue Management, and she specializes in understanding how shift work impacts a person's ability to do work safely. She will be our guest for the show and can take your calls. She's not a doctor, but if you do have questions about things you can be doing to try and regulate your sleep schedule, she can help you out. So again, that number is 1-800-716-2221. You can also email us bluesky@cbc.ca. Now, Mike, welcome to Blue Sky.
Thank you so much. Great to be here.
It is wonderful to have you. This is a topic dear to my heart after spending many, many years as an early morning host. And if anyone's wondering why I am now doing this show, well, sleep is a big part of it. What is your story, Mike? How did you get into this line of work?
It's actually kind of interesting. You don't go to school to become a fatigue management expert. And it goes back to my very first job after I graduated. I was hired by CN Rail. And we very quickly had a problem. I was 6 months onto my job working in the safety department when all of a sudden we took a 100-car freight train and we drove it through a passenger train and we killed 23 people.
Oh
and
gosh.
that was the birth of fatigue management in North America. It was the first industrial accident that they actually said, you know what, fatigue is the primary cause here.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've kind of been dabbling in the area for the last 30 years, and this has kind of become my life. And it's not just shift workers that are tired. We know that it's in general, the population as a whole is struggling with fatigue.
Yeah, ask adults how they're doing, and I think usually people say, "I'm tired." It's a common response. How did people know, though, that accident was caused by fatigue?
There were a lot of flags that kind of indicated it. Part of it was how the work schedules were designed. We didn't have any kind of hours of service regulations back then, so you could work as many hours as you wanted. And what would happen is we would have engineers who would just finish operating a train, put their name on a spare board, so they could go home, maybe get an hour or two of sleep in, and then get a phone call and say, hey, we got another train available. Do you want to take it? And they would. And we knew historically that they would bypass a very sophisticated system we had on trains called the dead man pedal, where you can't keep the train going if your foot goes off the pedal. So that was a means of preventing them from going to sleep. But of course, it's not hard to work your way around such a sophisticated device. It's called a heavy rock or a heavy lunchbox, and you'd put that on the pedal, and then they would go and have a little nap. And we knew that this was a problem in all railroads. It wasn't unique to CN. It was across North America. So what would happen is if people weren't getting enough sleep, they would go on the train and they would kind of spell off each other and have little naps. Well, unfortunately, all three that were operating the train on the freight train side were all asleep when the incident happened. And we look at that, or we detect that based on their previous work schedules and how much time they actually had off to be able to even get sleep. And we know that the lead engineer had less than 4.5 hours of opportunity to get sleep, and the second engineer had less than 6, and the conductor had less than 5. So it just all played into the fact that they were consistently working schedules that were not allowing them to get the recuperative sleep that they need.
Mm-hmm.
As a consequence, they were all asleep at the same time.
I can understand the consequences of all being at sleep at the same time, but the cognitive impact of being so fatigued, even up into the point where you are asleep. I mean, what happens to someone when you're that tired?
Yeah, we refer to that as fatigue impairment, and this is where it gets kind of interesting. So you have this big front of the brain here called the prefrontal cortex, and not to get too sciencey, but it's the part of the brain that controls all of your reasoning and your logic. But more importantly, it actually directs traffic to other areas of the brain. So it controls your motor control responses, your emotional tolerances, your sensory perception. But when we're tired, the brain goes in search of conserving energy. So what does it do? It shuts down the biggest energy hog we have, which is that prefrontal cortex. So now we lose our reasoning, we lose our logic, we lose touch with our sensory perceptions, our motor control, our emotional responses. And the next thing you know, we go into states like a microsleep, especially if we have a lot of sleep that built up in us or we haven't been getting a lot of sleep. We'll go into a microsleep. And a microsleep is where basically your brain just says, you know what? I'm out of here. You haven't been looking after me, and I need to catch up on some rest. And right now is a really good time because you're doing something very boring and routine. That's usually when it hits. So if you're driving home at the end of a shift, that's a really high risk time to have a microsleep.
Are workplaces taking this more seriously now, do you think?
Yeah, I think it took a long time for the science to kind of catch up. At the beginning, when this big event happened at CN and kind of opened our eyes, it was another 15 years before we really had some solid research and science behind what we needed to do. And now add another 15 years onto that, and we really understand what's going on when people are fatigue impaired and how it affects their performance capabilities, but more importantly, from a personal standpoint, how it affects their health status. In fact, there's nothing more important to your overall health than sleep. It doesn't matter what you eat or what you drink or even whether or not you exercise. Sleep is fundamentally the only thing that affects you at the DNA level of every cell in your body. So it's got to get a little bit more respect than what we give it.
Yeah. We're going to talk to a shift worker in just a moment, but I have a few more questions for you because this is the way you're talking now, it sounds like a particular type of work where there was a requirement. The average person may not have that kind of disruption to a regular day. You work during the day, you go to sleep at night. But how does this apply to all sorts of people and all sorts of workplaces? Because you work with a variety of workplaces now.
Correct. Yeah. And again, yeah, it's not just shift workers, it's day workers that are struggling with fatigue too. So a lot of it has to do with the timing of your work. When do you work? What those hours are. We know that people that start before 6 a.m. are actually at a much higher risk than people who start after 6 a.m. And that's because now you're backing up when people have to wake up, which is during the peak dark hours of night when you're programmed to get your best quality sleep. We also have misunderstandings about people thinking that they adapt to shift work or they adapt to night work, and that's a fallacy. We don't actually adapt to night work. What we do is we adapt to a state of impairment, and that kind of becomes our new normal. So that's a bit of a myth that we adapt to night shifts, but there will be people that will swear that they have adapted. But if we measured them objectively using performance measures, they would see that they're not really adapting at all. So it depends a lot on timing.
I want to know more about that, adapting to a state of impairment. What does that actually look like?
Well, a really good example is we know biologically that we can equate fatigue impairment to alcohol impairment, for example. So if you've been simply awake for 17 hours, then you are the blood alcohol equivalency of 0.05% impairment. Now, that's just somebody who is awake for 17 hours. If you're awake for 20 to 21 hours, you're reaching closer to 0.08% impairment. And if you're awake for 24 hours, 0.10. Now, there's a lot of people that say, well, I don't work 17-hour shifts. But it's not about how long you work. It's from the point you wake up to the point you go back to bed. That's the time frame. And we have a lot of night shift workers who will get up on their first night shift, which is usually the worst for everybody. They'll get up on their first night shift in the morning, like 6, 7, 8 in the morning, and they'll stay up all day. Then they'll start their night shift. And by the time they're done their 10, 12-hour shift, they've been awake for 20, 21, 22 hours. And now we're letting them drive home.
This is a good point to bring in our next guest. But first, I want to remind people that you can call us with your own sleep stories, what you're doing to get a better night's sleep, or perhaps you're someone who does shift work and this has had an effect on your life, or an early morning person. Maybe you work in a bakery. Give us a call, 1-800-716-2221. You can also email us, bluesky@cbc.ca. Deju Akanji is a registered nurse in Saskatoon. She works mostly nights, and she's on the line right now to tell us about how that fits into her life. Deju, hello.
Hello. Thanks for having me, Jen.
Yeah, thank you for being with us. What does your own sleep schedule look like?
Seriously, it is terrible. And I totally, I relate with everything Mike said about a state of impairment. Yes, I think that's the reality of it. You're not getting enough sleep. That's it. But again, it has a lot of impact on how your mood, your feelings, your behavior, everything. Yeah, I leave work and I'm super exhausted because, I don't get enough sleep in between break times. You don't even get to the non-REM state of sleep, which is really, really a bad thing, I guess. So yeah, I usually would stay awake for over 18 hours and then start my shift the next day. So very negative effect on the way I think, the way I feel, the way I behave. So I'm coming home in the morning and I'm driving like a crazy person. And somebody who has had enough rest in the night, they come up be like, "Oh, you like get out of the way," or something like that. Yeah, that's how it is. It is. Yeah, your body just tells you that you're not capable of functioning to the highest capability during the day.
And you're not just a nurse who is working these night shifts, but you're also a parent. So how does that compound some of your sleep struggles?
Oh, yes. Okay, let me just give you an idea of how my morning goes. So I do night shifts, 12 hours. And then I'm coming back in the morning trying to get my kids ready for school. My husband would have done the big majority of the work, and I just come around and just drive them to school. I get really cranky, especially when they're not ready. My behavior is, I become a little irritable. I just don't feel it. I just want to get them to school and just come back home and crash. So again, I'm not having that emotional connection with my kids. I'm I'm not having that, quietness like a mother should. Like, can we just go to school? I find myself yelling like, I need to go. Let's get out of here. And that's obviously not a good thing when it comes to parenting, but it is what it is with my lack of sleep, my lack of rest, and my shift work.
I totally hear what you're saying, Deju, because as a longtime morning show host and a parent too, I was finding it so hard to parent when I'd get home, and bedtime was an absolute nightmare because I had been up for so long and I was so exhausted. And if they didn't go to bed, then I couldn't get enough sleep. So I have a lot of empathy for you because I know what it's like. I just want to bring Mike into the conversation because hearing Deidre be so honest about how this lack of sleep affects her, Mike, this probably sounds familiar to you.
Yeah, this is totally familiar. I mean, just raising a young family in and of itself is enough to deplete us from getting a good night's sleep. But then you add in the shift work equation, and it becomes even more difficult. And I add in now the time of year that it is when you start thinking about the fact that we get less sunlight in the wintertime, right? And I'm not going to get into the whole daylight savings aspect of things, but just the fact that we do have reduced amounts of light in the wintertime. And you put that onto the back of a shift worker who's working night shifts, and you're missing a lot of sunlight. And sunlight is so key to our overall ability to get a good night's sleep. And that's the link that hasn't been made in a lot of research in the past. So we really need to have that daily light exposure to sunlight in order to facilitate a good healthy state and facilitate a better sleep later on at night. Now, the nice thing about the sunlight is that it also boosts our serotonin. And our serotonin is one of our feel-good hormones that makes us nice, happy people that, others want to play with, right? As opposed to the cranky, irritable, miserable person you are just trying to get your kids out the door. So again, it comes down to timing of work, timing of light exposure, and just how you can manage all of these. It's very complex. There's no simple answer.
Mm-hmm. It is complex, and I think that's what we're trying to work through today a bit with your help, Mike. And we will have more time to talk more specifically about light and sort of what we can do. But Deju, I want to know more about all the other aspects of you, because we talked a bit about how it impacts you as a parent, how you feel after your shift, but how do you feel you're doing as as a nurse during your shift? Do you still feel like you're able to do what you need to do?
Well, the working day and night shift are quite different. They're on different levels because I mean during the night people are sleeping really. They should be sleeping, right? But if they're like fresh, like I'm working on a surgery ward where everybody's wanting to have some medications. They want to use the bathroom. They keep you working, right? They keep you awake. So I mean there is it actually negatively impacts how much you give your patients because you are tired, especially if you come up on shift with like an extra large coffee, for instance. By let's say 12 a.m., the coffee is already telling you that okay, your body is done. You need to go and rest. And then by 1 a.m., you're already exhausted and tired. And so the way you start dragging your feet and helping your patients, well, it takes a lot of energy and motivation, even from your colleagues, to get you going throughout the night. Because yeah, it is what it is. Were you
Yeah,
going to say something?
well, we need people to work these shifts, right? So we'll kind of go to
Exactly.
Mike for how to best cope with it. But I'm wondering, you mentioned coffee. What else are you doing to try
Yeah.
and get through the challenges that come with your shift, Deju?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, there's a lot of people. A good work environment is a big deal as well. When you're working nights, you need friends, you need people to chat with. I've seen a lot of my colleagues bring books around to just, read through when it's a little bit quiet so they can stay awake, or you see people watching movies just to keep them awake and open and alert to get to serve their patient in the best capacity that they can do. For me personally, I think I try to stay off coffee because at the end of the day in the morning, I can sleep, I can get my mind, to just relax and just rest because it goes so chaotic in the morning, usually when you don't get enough sleep. But yeah, I try to stay away from coffee and I just try to just keep myself involved, like doing extra work on the shift. Even if my patients are not calling me to do things, I find things, getting all the paperwork done, just finding something to just keep you awake. Otherwise, it takes a lot of pressure on yourself for sure.
How long do you think you can keep doing this, Deju?
Oh, Alicia, I really don't know because I think it's a big struggle. Every day is different. Every shift is different because sometimes you get enough sleep during your breaks, and sometimes you don't even get any sleep at all. So I don't know, maybe another 6 months or a year. I mean, the
Oh,
reason I do nights is just because of family dynamics, right? There are so many other things that factors into do you want to work a day shift or do you want to work a night shift? But when you think about family dynamics, you know that maybe the night is just the best. But for now, maybe another year, give it a try and see. And maybe just keep trying all this that Mike is suggesting.
Deju, really good to talk to you today. Thank you for being one of our guests.
Thank you so much for having me.
That is Deju Akonji, a registered nurse in Saskatoon. Our guest today is Mike Harnett, a president of Solaris Fatigue Management. I have so many questions for Mike. Not only are you a newsreader, you're a parent, and so you would be familiar with sleepless nights, right?
Yeah, a long time ago, our first kid didn't sleep at all. And I remember one morning, my wife woke me up at 3 o'clock in the morning to go get the baby a bottle.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember my brain was buzzing. The analogy I made at the time is like, those old tower computers, and if you drop one and it just starts making some ungodly noise and like brrr, that was what it was like in my head. I could literally feel my brain vibrating in my skull. That's how tired I was.
Yeah.
Just
It almost like an out-of-body experience. I remember too.
Oh, yeah.
Small, the baby stage. I'd gone to Superstore. I accidentally left my keys in one of the carts, and I was wandering around Superstore trying to find my keys, and I ran into people I knew, and I thought I should not be out in public. I can barely form sentences. I'm so tired, and just losing things and just a complete mess. So, parents know this stuff. They really do.
Yep.
David, thank you.
You're welcome.
That is the CBC's David Shield. I'm Leisha Grabinski. You're listening to Blue Sky here on CBC Radio 1. You can call us with your sleep stories, 1-800-716-2221. You can also email bluesky@cbc.ca. We're with Mike Harnett today, who is a fatigue management specialist who knows how to deal with all of this stuff. And so I want to get back to what we were hearing from Deju, because we need people to work night shifts. We need coffee shops to open at a particular time. We need people to host morning shows. And so when you have those irregular hours, Mike, what's your advice so that the impact on your health is not so great?
Yeah, if we look at it from the personal side of things, because there's certainly the responsibility on the organizational side of things too, but from the personal standpoint, we always first and foremost want you to get enough sleep. And the science is really clear on this. In order to eliminate all of the fatigue products that are building in your body and your brain, which is what fatigue is, there's actual products building in your brain. It's not just a sensation of tiredness or drowsiness. Then we need to have 7 to 9 hours of sleep to wash away those products. Otherwise, they continue to build, and that's what causes a lot of our health complications, including mental health complications. So ideally, we want people to aim for that minimum of 7 hours of sleep as an adult. Now, there's a lot of people that are not getting that, even those that work day shift. So you can't, if you typically average around 5 or 6 hours of sleep, you can't just go to bed an hour earlier and get that extra hour in. You have to train your body. Your body has been conditioned to getting less sleep than what it's actually needing, and that's not a good thing. But you can train it. You just have to do it in small increments. So maybe add another 15 minutes on for a week or two, then add another 15 minutes on for a week or two, and you can slowly build up, hopefully, to that at minimum of 7 hours. But there are people that need as much as 9 hours to fully recover and repair, and they're just not getting it.
I wonder how can you figure out if you're someone who does need more sleep? And I know that teenagers tend to need more sleep. At least I've heard that. There's even stuff on TikTok right now about how women need more sleep than men. Is that true? How do you know how much sleep you need?
Yeah, that's a bit of a myth. I will address the teenager thing, though, because, gosh, I wish I knew this when I was a teenager. But the reality is, when we are going into our puberty stages and into the teen years, we are going through a major growth development phase. And in order to accommodate that, we need a lot of human growth hormone deposited into our body. Now, the only time human growth hormone is deposited into our body is when we're in the deepest layers of sleep. So we are programmed during that time to fall into the deeper layers of sleep and hold us there longer, which is why, as a parent, you can't wake your kid up because they're like dead to the world. And that's because they're in those really, really deep stages, and it's hard to wake up from those. They're also programmed to go to sleep later. They become more night owl oriented and sleep in longer and deeper. So when mom goes in there with a vacuum and starts, slamming it into the bed saying, "Get up, you lazy so-and-so, you're wasting the day." And it's not that they're choosing to be lazy. It's everything in their body telling them, you need to sleep so we can get this growth hormone in your system to build you up to become an adult. We grow out of that when we get into our early adult years, but it's a tough time. It's really tough, especially for schools.
What happens when we age? When we're out of that stage and in 30s, 40s? First off, so we could do a bit of myth busting. You said women don't need more sleep than men.
No, they don't. Women will often sacrifice their sleep a lot more for family responsibilities. But in terms of overall health status, all adults, for the most part, between 7 to 9 hours of sleep.
But what happens to us as we age? Are we not capable of sleeping more? And I feel like the older I get, the conversation in my circle changes and everybody's complaining about sleep patterns and they can't sleep and there are issues that seem to be arising.
Yeah, there's a couple of reasons for that. One is the sleep pattern that you've allowed yourself to be on. If you're in a history of always cutting your sleep short, well, it's not like you're going to be able to change that really easily as you get older. It's going to become even more and more difficult. But the second factor that's probably more important is that we have a natural sleep hormone in our body called melatonin. But as we age, we produce less and less melatonin. So people who, as they get into their, later 50s and 60s, you're going to start to see a transition where they become more of a morning person, not because they necessarily want to, but they're waking up really early because they can't stay asleep because they don't have enough melatonin in their system. Consequently, they'll tire quicker in the afternoon and look for a little nap maybe later on in the day.
So if that's happening, that's just normal for the most part.
It is normal, but there are ways that we can improve our sleep so that we can get closer to that minimum requirement. But it is a natural process, and which is why once we get to the 60 plus range, we say the average amount of sleep you need is between 7 and 8 hours as opposed to 7 and 9 hours. It's also because you're not as active as when you were younger.
So I want to ask you about a few things that people might be turning to. So Brianna wrote us, and she says, I have sleep apnea due to sinuses, and my CPAP machine has helped after years of trying to figure it out. But it's my new friend, perimenopause, that has been causing such sleep issues for me. Waking up in the middle of the night, insomnia, waking up at 5 a.m., even without an alarm, regardless of what time I go to bed. Magnesium is kind of helping, but I can't take melatonin because of other meds. I work out in the morning to kickstart my energy and go for a walk at lunch to rejuvenate. Otherwise, I am in a brain fog and dragging my butt. So quite a bit in that email there.
I really appreciate what she's doing, and I think she's handling things very well, as much as she can right now. That's great. Especially early morning sun is the best type of sun. The spectrum of the sunlight changes as the day progresses. So, for example, 15 minutes in the early morning is the equivalent of 2 hours in the late afternoon in terms of benefit. So getting out, having that exposure, that walk outside, that's great.
What about sun lamps or one of those happy lamps?
No, especially again in winter conditions, or if we don't have a lot of sunlight, or if we're night shift workers, yes. Light therapy. I actually have light therapy glasses that I wear as opposed to a light box, but you can get light boxes, light therapy glasses. I'm more of a night owl. So in the wintertime for me, especially living on the West Coast where it's overcast for like 6 months of the year, I wake up, that's the first thing I put on for 20 minutes and I'm good to go. Huh. So they are very good at increasing your capability of having a better sleep later on.
Interesting. So, what about things like magnesium and melatonin?
Yeah, certainly there's nothing wrong with taking magnesium as a supplement. Now, melatonin as a supplement is something that we're a little bit more concerned about. The problem with melatonin in Canada and North America is that it's not properly regulated. So there is a lot of bad products out there. And in fact, there was a major study done in Canada on the products that were on the shelf that you could go and buy. And when they did the study, they found that the amount of ingredient that was listed on the label was anywhere from 83% less to 486% more than what was actually in the bottle. So, or what was in the bottle that compared to what was on the label. So we've got no quality control over the melatonin products. We know that their shelf life is very, very short. More importantly, it's a hormone. And everybody has different hormonal needs. So just because the bottle says take this amount, this period of time before you go to bed, well, that might work for you, but it's not going to work for me. And it's not going to work for the person sitting beside me. And on top of that, there are side effects. There are night terrors, which are extreme nightmares. It causes sleep disorders. It can cause all kinds of indigestion problems. The big thing that people complain about is that when they wake up after using melatonin, they're in this very extended period of grogginess, or what we call sleep inertia. So they just can't kind of get their bearings about them. And the big concern is that there's a lot of promotion of melatonin products out there with a lot of conflicting evidence as to their benefits. So the big concern I have is the fact that we have a lot of doctors who will push products like melatonin and who really don't understand the sleep neurobiology behind it, and they're issuing it to kids. And now there's preliminary evidence. It still has to be more support behind this, but there is preliminary research that's indicating that taking melatonin, giving it to a child, can affect their puberty hormones. So again, not something, and plus they get night terrors and things like that from them. So not something we recommend you pushing on your children, no matter what your family physician might say. Oh yeah, give them half a tablet. No, not a good option.
Before we get to some callers, I just want to ask you about other sleeping pills, because people might be looking for aids to get to sleep. Is that sometimes necessary?
It is if you have a sleep disorder. And I think that's the key here is most people will start to reach for pills without knowing what the actual issue is, why they can't sleep. So there are 100 different sleep disorders out there. So if you do have insomnia where you're just, not getting the quality sleep you need and you're struggling, you need to get checked out by a sleep clinician, not just your family physician. If your family physician issues you prescription medication, go see another doctor, because they're not even giving you a diagnosis until you know what your sleep disorder is. There are certain medications that can help you, but you don't want the wrong medication, and you don't want a band-aid that isn't going to give you the right solution. So there is some concern around that.
This is so interesting, Mike. I appreciate you being with us. I do want to go to a couple of callers. And so Stuart joins us on the line right now in Saskatoon. Hi, Stuart.
Hello there. I've been a shift worker all my adult life. I've been not a normal. And when I started work for a major corporation, we had committees on shift work, sleep deprivation, the whole bit. After 35 years of working, the attitude of most employers at where I worked was, that's your problem. Deal with it. There's all these studies, all these reports, especially from the European Common Market, that you should have nap rooms. No, you can't have a nap room because we pay you to work, not to have a nap. You know, they have all these facilities and they don't do anything about it.
What kind of impact did that have on your life, Stuart?
Basically, it's while you're working, you're basically surviving. After you work, all the studies say within 5 years, your body should readjust to a normal life. And, one of the major problems is workmen's compensation. They don't recognize sleep disorders from the work site. There's only been one case in Canada that was in the East Coast. The workmen's compensation awarded a guy for sleep deprivation because of work, and the employers and the government took him to court, and it was overruled. So,
well, I appreciate you calling, Stuart, because I think this is the kind of work that Mike is definitely focused on right now. So thanks, Stuart.
Okay.
Mike, I know you can't comment specifically on that, but in general, and the idea of lack of sleep being a workers' compensation issue, I'm curious about that. I'm also curious about how our bodies recalibrate after years of shift work. So I don't know which one you feel you want to tackle, but some interesting things there.
There's a lot to unpack there. In terms, let's start off with the recovery from shift work. It depends on how many years you've done shift work, what your schedule design was like. That will impact how long it takes you to recover. And as I was mentioning offline before, there's a lot of people who have retired from shift work and who've come up to me and said, when do I start to feel normal again? And it can take many years for you to get back into a circadian pattern, but you need help to get to that circadian pattern. And if you're just kind of retiring and trying to figure it out on your own, you're going to have a lot more challenges. So working with a sleep clinician can certainly help you with that to facilitate a faster recuperation.
But what would be the kind of help, what would you do to help your body recalibrate?
Things like light timing is really, really critical. When you're having light exposure, when you're not having light exposure, what type of light exposure? One of the problems we have as a society is we have way too much light exposure at the wrong time, which is in the evening hours, and certainly if you're a night shift worker, then into the nighttime hours. And so because we have become a society that hoards themselves indoors, we don't get that effect of daylight or sunlight, which controls our circadian rhythms and keeps us in a healthy state. So when you only spend 10% of your day outside, and that's a luxury for some people, then we should expect that more and more people are going to have circadian rhythm disorders, sleep disorders, health consequences as a result of that. I'm
glad you brought that up because, I've long complained about a too early wake-up call. But in a new shift that is kind of a regular person's shift, 8 to 5, now you're talking to me that I'm not getting outside enough. I used to have my afternoons. I could go skiing in the afternoon. I'd go for walks, I would go to the park sometimes with my kids. And for a lot of us, you're working during the day. So what are some practical things that people could do so that you're not exposing yourself to artificial light at the wrong times? What would be some good practices, some tips you could share?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first thing in the morning, if you can get outside, have your coffee break outside, that would be great. But in the evening, that's when you really have to start paying attention to the amount of light, the type of light, the proximity of the light to you. That's what's really important. So in the evening hours, if you're at home, you're on the couch, turn off any unnecessary lights. Everything should be turned off. Only keep on whatever light is necessary. Ideally, you don't want a table lamp right beside you. You don't want it right by your eyes. You would be better off having it behind you, and a dimmer switch, dim light is always better. If you're going to be, one of the challenges we have, of course, is technology and all of our devices being backlit with this bright blue LED light, which is designed to optimize viewing on the screen. Unfortunately, that brightness combined with the blue light suppresses production of our melatonin again. So now we have difficulty falling asleep when we finally turn off our device. But the bigger problem with technology is that when we're looking at it, if you're holding a handheld device directly in front of your face, or you're watching a big screen TV across the room, if you want to watch Netflix, watch it on the big screen TV across the room, not on your handheld device in front of your face, because the closer it is to you, the more intense the light is on your circadian rhythms. And that's what we need to start recognizing, is we have to start limiting our time on these devices, or at the very least, activate the automated blue light filters that are in these devices, as well as, and maybe even perhaps more importantly, turn down the brightness in the evening hours and just try to stay off them as much as we can. They're also designed as a social tool to keep us engaged, right? So, I mean, the engineers behind Facebook and all the social media out there, they're designed to keep you engaged, and they keep giving you notifications, and you get a blast of dopamine every time there's a notification that pops up. So you reach for your phone and you get another blast of light, blast of light, blast of light. And that makes it difficult to fall asleep.
So interesting, Mike. Let's go to another caller. So Pat joins us on the line right now in Prince Albert. Hi, Pat.
Hi. Well, I don't know what I can add to this conversation, but I'm going to say that I'm not that far away from 80, and I started working shift work in the 60s. And at the time when I phoned my mom and said I'm going to be working nights, she said, "Oh, you were born to work nights." So I guess that's part of my... I've enjoyed shift work all my life, except that in the beginning, we used to work, when we worked a night shift, we worked a 28-day shift, and you stayed on nights for 28 nights, or, well, not 28 nights, you got days off, but you stayed on nights for a whole month. Then they fast forward to where we were doing seven shifts in a row kind of thing. So you stayed on nights for 7 shifts and that. Then with all the improvements that they made, they went to 12-hour shifts, and all of a sudden you're working 3 of them. All that did was disrupt my sleep. And I don't think I heard anybody who appreciated, even other coworkers, that working 3 nights every once in a while just disrupts your shift, your total.
You're not
body
used to it, is what some people would say to that.
Well, yeah, it's not enough to get into any other kind of rhythm.
Mike, I'm wondering what your thoughts are on. Sorry, Pat. I just want to ask Mike about that, because that does come up a lot. Are you used to the hours now, and that idea of getting multiple days off in a row, to take you off nights for a bit? What are your thoughts on that?
There's a couple of things. Most importantly, if we're not getting the sleep we need, then the next best thing you can do for yourself is have a very strict routine. Routine. When you wake up, when you go to bed, when you eat, when you exercise, when you socialize, the more consistent the routines are in your life, the easier it is for your rhythms to stay connected, synchronized, and keep you healthy. But if you have an erratic schedule where you're constantly shifting back and forth, and not just because of shift work, but because of staying up late to look after kids, or maybe you only get ice time at 11 o'clock at night, so that's when you do your rec hockey, right? So things like that will disrupt the rhythms, and we have like over 700 rhythms in our body, and they're all trying to harmonize with each other. So it's that disruption of the rhythms that puts us into an unhealthy state and sets off the disease state. So that's one of the things to consider. But the other part is that the more nights you work in a row, if you're working a night shift and you live a night shift lifestyle, that is the best scenario. That would mean that when you're off of night shifts, you still live like you're on night shift. So you still, you do your grocery shopping in the middle of the night, you do your entertainment in the middle of the night, and you sleep during the day. That would be the best case scenario for anyone who has to work night shifts. But who wants to do that? Who wants to live a complete night shift lifestyle and never see their friends and family again?
Yeah.
What we do know is every night that you work, you become more and more performance impaired and your rhythms become more and more desynchronized. So the problem with that is that, and we have all kinds of research and studies that prove this, is everyone will say if they have to go onto a shift, the first 2 nights are always really bad. And then after that, they say, yep, I've stabilized, I've adapted, I'm good now. And they think they're doing fine for the next subsequent nights. But if we were to measure them on every performance metric possible objectively, we would see a continued increase in mistakes and errors and lapses and quality of decisions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's because the impairment of the brain is not letting you pick up that you are getting more and more impaired. It's, it's kind of like a drunk not realizing how drunk they are. We don't understand that it's affecting our performance and that it's actually going to affect our health in the long run.
Which we don't want doctors and nurses experiencing.
Yeah, it's a tough sell because you may feel like, again, like you've adapted to that night shift, but you haven't physiologically adapted. You're just in this numb state with your brain, and it feels comfortable there, but that doesn't mean it's good for it.
Pat, thanks so much for calling. There's a few more people waiting to get on before we end the show today. So thank you for joining us.
Goodbye.
Bye. We've got Jay on the line in Regina. Hi, Jay.
Hey, how are we today?
Oh, pretty good.
So I just want to talk a little bit about my daily routine during the week. I'm up at 3:30 a.m. every day, going to the gym at 4:30, and then at work for 6. I'm in my mid-40s in construction, doing commercial and residential painting. I go to bed around 9:30, so I get about 6 hours of sleep. I feel great in the morning. In fact, from 3:30 to 4:30 is when I'm most productive, responding to emails and such. How concerned should I be as I get older, again, being in my mid-40s, being very active, going to the gym 6 days a week, during the week getting, approximately 5.5 to 6 hours of sleep. And then on the weekend, when I get 7 hours of sleep, I feel like crap. It's like, I almost got too much sleep. How concerned should I be going forward?
Great question. Mike?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, listen to what your body is telling you. And if you are feeling good with your routine and you're getting the sleep you need on those days when you're only getting 6 hours of sleep, if you're feeling good, if you're not waking up fighting fatigue later in the day, if you're functioning okay, if you don't feel like you're having any issues from a mental health perspective or emotional perspective, then hey, you know what? It's working for you. It sounds like you've got a very structured and solid routine. That is making a really big difference. Exercise, especially if you're doing more or incorporating aerobic exercise in particular, will also help to stabilize your rhythms and keep them stronger and harder to desynchronize. So that's a plus. You are obviously more of a morning lark as opposed to a night owl, so to speak, and that's why you're getting up earlier in the morning. You're hitting what we call your circadian low when you're at your functional worst earlier into the evening hours, like probably around 2 a.m., as opposed to people who are more less morning, like early extreme mornings. They're going to feel their circadian low probably anywhere between 3 and 6 a.m. So everybody has a little bit of difference in them. It's called chronotype. We all have a different chronotype. So you got to listen to your body, and what your body is telling you right now seems to be working. As you get older, you will probably see that your body starts to adjust in some capacity because you won't be producing maybe as much melatonin. But just listen to your body. It sounds like you're doing everything that's working for you right now.
I've loved this. Jay, thanks for calling. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
I'm gonna try and squeeze in one more call. Loretta in Saskatoon. We've only got about 30 seconds, Loretta. Why don't you pose your question about sleep?
Got it. With our current economic, I'll say crisis in the world and locally and so on, a lot of times stress around money keeps people awake, yet getting these prescriptions from the doctor to go to a sleep clinic, those aren't covered.
That's such a great question.
So
and just the cost of getting into a sleep clinic. Mike, we'll give you the last little bit here. Go for it.
Yeah, you know what? It's different in every province, and I understand. Actually, I just had some feedback on the Saskatchewan system, and it does make it more challenging. In lieu of that, there are sleep clinics that you can go to that are designed more towards obstructive sleep apnea, but they can help maybe identify some other areas as well. And you don't need to necessarily get a reference or a referral to them. And what they'll do is they'll send you home with a sleep kit. And it may be a mask, it may be a device that you put beside your bed, but they'll pick up things like snoring and other factors, so they can do a diagnosis on that. I'm a little bit surprised that it isn't covered. It should be, definitely. And certainly from an organizational perspective, this is something that we encourage organizations to look at their benefit plan, because it's only in their best interest to offer benefits that make sense to the nature of the work that they're prescribing out there. If they're doing shift work operations, yeah, you need to start supporting the shift workers in your benefit plan.
One last question, yes or no? Naps, yay or nay?
Yes, with qualifier.
What's the qualifier? Can you make it quick?
You don't want to rely on them to replace the fact that you're not getting enough sleep. You always want to try and aim for getting that consolidated block of 7 to 9 hours of sleep. And the odd nap, if you had a bad night of sleep, yeah, nap can help you out.
Naps. Great. Awesome. This has been so interesting, Mike. I'm sure we'll have you back because there were a few callers we didn't get on. I could have kept going and going and going. Really good to have you today. Thanks so much for being one of our guests.
Thank you.
That is Mike Harnett, president of Solaris Fatigue Management. We also heard from a registered nurse earlier on the show sharing her struggles with doing night shifts. If you didn't get your call in, you could always call Talkback 1-800-661-7540. You can also email us bluesky@cbc.ca.